Because of human nature, truth has become something which is thought and even argued about, and many words have been written about it in every age, in fact tomes, despite the words of Edwin Arnold in Light of Asia. He said, "Measure not with words the immeasurable, nor sink the string of thought into the fathomless. Who asks doth err, who answers errs. Say naught." The sages tell us that truth is incommunicable, and the Lord Buddha is reputed to have said, "Accept and live only according to that which enables you to see truth face to face." We are shown the way, but told that truth is within ourselves. And as Deepak Chopra quips, because you are looking inward, no one from the outside can help you. This implies a kind of isolation and solitude that only the strong can accept. Your inner strength grows from experience. The journey can makes you strong. I'm using a lot of different people today in this talk. It's not the sort of talk I can just give off the top of my head, so I've got a lot of friends who are helping me with this talk. So Sri Ram, who was the father of our late President Radha Bernier, he said that there has to be a free search for truth. Only in freedom from any determining urge or prefixed goal can truth be found. And truth in the deepest sense has to be found by each one for themselves. Also, an absolute cannot be known from the outside, for then it would be a relative thing. The absoluteness lies in the merging of the experiencing consciousness in the experience, so that for the time there is no subject apart from the object, no self and other. Anya Besant puts it beautifully. You are moved by the will, the spiritual aspect, when the whole of your inner nature, drawn up to a single point, self-determined, sends that nature along the road that you have chosen within yourself. Helena Blavatsky, HPB, in The Voice of the Silence, tells us of two paths, one of which we might be taking. The doctrine of the I she equates with head learning, and this is for the crowd, she says. Jesus spoke to the masses in parables that they might better understand. The doctrine of the heart is for the elect, she says. Jesus taught his disciples about the keys to the mysteries, about soul wisdom. We are told to remain content with the eye or open path if we find the secret or heart path too high-winged for us. We can always try in another life, she says. Now, I have chosen to call the esoteric heart path, both paths have got lots of different names, the rock face, and the mystic eye path, the spiral path. Early writer T. Subbarao encouragingly writes that the two paths both have the same end, a glorified immortality. The path round the mountain is the steady, natural path of progress through moral effort and the practice of the virtues. It is said that this path requires no teacher beyond the inspiration of the God within, the one master. The other road is the precipitous path of occultism, through a series of initiations. Progress along this path is effected by the adept directing through the chela various occult forces which enable them to obtain knowledge of his spiritual nature, enable the adept to obtain knowledge of the chela's spiritual nature. I will first look at the spiral path. Now it sounds like a long, plodding journey round the mountain, but spirals are characteristic of dynamic systems. You've only got to think of Fohat and things like that, and express a continuous movement. Jill Peirce suggests in her book, The Mystic Spiral, that the spiral tendency within each one of us is the longing for and growth towards wholeness. Any circular movement carried into the dimension of space-time becomes a spiral. So it won't just keep going round. It'll go up. Writer Dwight Johnson, in his book Spirals for Growth, writes that although each spiral can be complete in itself, and as this is, I have to really listen to this carefully, as incompatible perceptions accumulate, dilemmas are uncovered that can only be resolved through a fundamental change and ascent to the next spiral, accompanied by some kind of crisis where perceptions are reorganized to embrace new realities and expanded awareness. Was it Ron who spoke something about that? Somebody did, about things piling up and, you know, there's a forced change to the next level. Advancement from one spiral growth to another is a product of sustained effort. Annie Besant, in her book In the Outer Court, tells us the goal of the pilgrimage at the summit of the mountain, calling it the temple. The pilgrims do not see the light coming from the temple for a long time, and certainly stray off the path, although those at the summit do send help. Recognizing the purpose of the journey is a great advancement. Souls who have caught a glimpse tread on more steadily, practice virtues and become diligent and heedful. They are beginning to help neighbours and take people with them. And eventually knowledge comes to meet them through intuition. So on that path, it's not just a case of you plodding on. There's all the other people with you who you can help. In the Theosophical Journal of May 1990, I found an article called The Validity of Mysticism by writer Beatrice Bruto. It doesn't appear that she was a Theosophist, but she certainly studied religion, philosophy and science. I found her comments useful when looking at the evolving pilgrim on the spiral path. Beatrice writes that the genuine mystic, either previously or simultaneously, undergoes a moral transformation of life and consciousness. The impediment to mystical consciousness is the clinging to our selfishness, our own desires, willfulness, sense of personality, and separated ego identity. Mystics have extraordinarily strong and healthy egos, but he or she rises above it to still another level of being and consciousness. The moral transformation of the mystic is practical, showing plainly in appropriate social activities. It is a steady life of justice, patience, generosity, and all other virtues. Genuine mysticism grows up out of and returns to a life characterized by common sense, intelligence, and rationality. The mystical experience, while itself transitional, produces insight and intellectual transformation that gives rise to understanding, to a repatterning of one's metaphysical view of the world. And this will not be inarticulate. It can be expressed and it will be logical. Increased clarity of mind, greater perceptiveness, improved concentration, and so forth, usually follow on from genuine mystical experience. So there's quite a lot there. The true mystic has an enriched vitality and enters into worldly work with strength, interest, cheerfulness, and right concern, but will not be attached to it. There is a mix of dedication and detachment. She says the other mark is humour. Playful like a child, enjoys simple things, appreciates beauty. All in all, the mystic seems to be down to earth, ordinary. So the mystic, of course, you're not at the bottom of the mountain when you're the mystic. But to realise oneself as one with the one is mysticism. The consciousness must be one in which the duality of subject and object is transcended. It is really tough going. We are pretending to talk about something that is by definition incommunicable, to think about something understood to be inconceivable. We are in the realm of the paradoxical for our language and logic. Well, enough about the easy path. Let's take a look at the rock phase. It has been said already that this path leads the climber through a series of initiations. Clara Codd describes initiations as forcible openings of consciousness and a widening of the channels of divine energies. These energies being, like electricity, impersonal and neutral, are in their effects dependent upon the channel through which they flow. Hence the need for perfect purity in all our bodies before they can be usefully employed. If the chela loses moral balance, they may fall into the dark side. An example is the difference between the white over the black magician being one of unselfish or selfish nature. This path is called also the path of renunciation and the path of woe, because the awakening spiritual perceptions of the disciple show the spiritual darkness in which most men live. Van der Lau, in Gods in Exile, takes a slightly different viewpoint. He says, there is no reason why we should not call it the path of joy. The same achievement which means woe to our lower nature spells joy to our higher self. And it depends on the standpoint we take whether our experience be joyful or sorrowful. As long as man in his pilgrimage through matter identifies himself entirely with his bodies and follows entirely their dictate in utter oblivion of his own true divine nature, he does not suffer, but is contented in an animal way. It is only when the soul in its earthly prison begins to recall the divine home from whence it lives exiled, when through love, beauty or truth, consciousness of its own true nature awakens, that suffering begins. I thought that was an interesting point. Well, it seems a good reason to call it the path of woe, actually, doesn't it? So, Annie Besant says that the soul knows the vast difficulty of the task ahead. To climb the steepest part of the mountain in a few lives, instead of carrying on round, taking myriads of lives. Now she gives 4 simultaneous tasks, and these following things I'm giving are just very in a nutshell. So these 4 simultaneous tasks, he said, are purification and thought control, building of character, spiritual alchemy, a deliberate process of change, and fourthly, reaching the threshold with earnestness. Clara Codd writes of 3 main steps on the path of renunciation. To live to benefit mankind. That is the most important. To practice the 6 glorious virtues called the paramitas, which are synonymous with the Noble Eightfold Path and the 9 Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount. And thirdly, to reach nirvana's bliss, but to renounce it. Clara gives a brief description of the 6 virtues, which I know some of you will know these, but maybe you don't all. Firstly, charity. All systems of yoga begin with love and harmlessness. The charity there, it's not just like going to the charity shop and buying your goods or done it. It's much more, it's about love. Purity, morality, the pure in heart. The third one, patience, all absence of resentment. Fourth, energy, purpose, spiritual will. Fifth, contemplation, the inward path of meditation. And the sixth, wisdom, the spiritual wisdom, which is the fruit of the development of the intuition. Put very simply, very, very simply, the 4 initiations, the framework for this climb up the cliff face, rock face, take the pilgrim to be, and this is just giving the state that the 4 initiations. Firstly, one who has entered the stream, then one who will return but once, one who will no longer return, and one who has attained nirvana. Annie Besant does give a comforting rider. In treading this path of occultism, she says, it grows brighter as ignorance lessens. It grows serener as the vibrations of earth have less power to jar and to disturb. Now, in a very old Theosophist of January 1910, I found a very long article by a man called Kirby, W.H. Kirby, I don't know who he was, on man and the mountain, an analogy. And it really is all about climbing mountains somewhere like in the Alps and all that, but it's a wonderful analogy with the spiritual path. So I've just taken some points from it. It requires some determination and often not a little hardship to leave the beaten track of travellers and eventually reach the starting point for those who intend to do big things, attaining lofty heights and overcoming immense obstacles. Not all are bound in the same direction. The starting points are many, but for all the end and aim is the same: the conquering of some height, even if not yet the summit. The height of heights reserved for the few. These pioneers of paths know how scoffingly the mass of men, the pleasure seekers, look upon such self-imposed tasks. Is it not simpler to follow well-beaten tracks? What of the climb itself? First the period of preparation, then the process of training and repeated effort, and lastly the definite ascents, the ultimate stages of trial, attainment and perfection. There comes a time when the starting point for real effort has been shifted to a higher place. The subtler difficulties begin, those of choice, discrimination, experiment and experience. A present decision will be the fruit of the past and will have a bearing on the future. There is need for constant attention. As the summit draws gradually near, the air becomes purer and more rarefied, and the strain on the system more severe. But in compensation, the outlook is ever vaster and grander, and the range of vision takes in things in their entirety. At last the goal is won. The highest point of that particular range is reached, and with the winning comes the mastery of definite knowledge, the added power of comprehension. For looking down all round, it is now easy to perceive whither certain ways led, where pitfalls existed, where obstacles barred the way, and why mistakes were made. Few there are so far in the masses of mankind who have been strong enough and brave enough to achieve the great long climb. But all who have done so and have returned in safety to the village of men have told the same story in different ways at different times and with different words maybe. But all have testified to the same joy and have given the same advice and offered the same help to climbers and non-climbers alike. Having trodden the way, it is their privilege to shed some light on the path, so that ever greater numbers might follow in their footsteps. May this too be the privilege of all who set themselves to climb the holy mountain of divine wisdom, from whose summit shines out the pure white light from the temple of eternal love. This description sounds very like the rock face, but I am not so convinced that the spiral path is easy as it reaches the final ascent. We are told that there are many roads to take in the early stages, and that they gradually converge into one road to reality. Let's just have another look at the voice of the silence. HPB actually tells us that the path is one disciple, yet in the end, twofold. Could it be that both the rock face and the spiral path begin at base camp? I don't know. But I'm not convinced about the spiral path being such a very, very easy option. To which path does each individual belong? Subba Rao describes a steep path as a sort of intensive development to produce very quickly guides and leaders for the vast majority of humanity. So they go ahead to become guides. They need the guidance of a guru because it can be a dangerous path if the pace is forced. He goes on, only a few specially organised natures are fit for this path. It is therefore wiser not to seek the path of chelarship, that's his opinion. If a man is fit for it, his karma will lead him to it imperceptibly and infallibly. For the path of occultism seeks the chela and will not fail him when the fit man presents himself. Now, Geoffrey Hodgson suggests that the difference between the mystic and the occultist is that the mystic sees and feels the supreme importance of the right relationship, the union with God in equipoise. I like that word. So the mystic on the spiral path seeks the union with God in equipoise and is less concerned with organised knowledge. The occultist is of a temperament that must know and understand the way things work as he proceeds. The ideal, says Geoffrey Hodgson, is a balance of both. One must hold this equipoise constantly as an ideal. There are so many examples of systems in which a pair of opposites has a central pillar of balance, and some of us have been looking at the Kabbalistic tree of life this week, which has the central pillar. The chakra system with Ida and Pingala either side and Sushumna a central equipoise. As in the symbol of the caduceus with its two snakes and central rod, often used as a sign for healing. Hodgson mentions the Christ on the cross with a thief on each side and the many gateway and arch symbols. There must be a lot of these, more of these symbols which had this central rod. As the Buddha taught, one should tread the middle way in its occult as well as its philosophic significance. The deep experiences of life, of happiness and sorrow in past and present incarnations, enable an aspirant to achieve this balance. Another person I came across in old Theosophies, we've got them all up in the attic, In 1964, a Texan called Alfred Taylor, can't find anything about him, has some thoughts on this need for balance. In all ages and places, man has probed and pondered over the world he lives in to discover truth. It is, of course, an endless quest, and at our stage of evolution there is much that obscures our vision, for now we see through a glass darkly. We must travel light with no vested interest in particular thoughts, concepts or feelings. This is a type of homelessness the aspirant for truth requires. We must be homeless in the sense that we have not settled down with particular beliefs or viewpoints. In our search for a reality, it is necessary for us to advance both by the way of meditation and by the way of study of the phenomenal world. The way within develops wisdom, and study and experience of the outer world develops knowledge. Excuse me. Sorry. There must be balance between the two. How much of the suffering borne by humanity has been due to lack of pertinent knowledge? On the other hand, if we lack wisdom, knowledge will be used for personal benefits or will be perverted in other ways to the detriment of the individual and people generally. Geoffrey Hodgson has some interesting observation in his book on yogic ascent. We're back to Geoffrey Hodgson now. He writes, "The greatest single liberating agency is the knowledge, transformed through experience into reality, uttermost and unshakable. The knowledge that individuality is an illusion." That's a difficult sentence. I'll read it again. "The greatest single liberating agency is the knowledge, transformed through experience into reality, uttermost and unshakable, that individuality is an illusion and unity alone is truth. This is the universal solvent by the application of which prison walls melt away, the true purpose of alchemy. Some aspirants are free to become hermits, monks or nuns, and destiny leads them to their retreat. There, in silence and solitude, they develop their powers and open the gates of the soul. Others must still remain to fulfill their destinies among men, to serve humanity, and assist in the work of the Adept Brotherhood. Even they find their lives so arranged for them that a measure of privacy and freedom is granted for these inner purposes." This is still Geoffrey Hodgson. "In the main, the lives lived out amongst men," he says, "are the most fruitful and make for swifter progress towards deliverance. They also help to clear the karmic way to lives in retreat. A combination of both is ideal, namely, whilst living and serving out in the world, also to live the life of a yogi. This is the most difficult, though the best of all lives." Meanwhile, back at the rock face, what would the climber need but balance and equipoise? Surely that is true of the spiritual path, especially as it gets nearer the summit, where it must be very steep. Even if you're going down to spiral, it's very steep. Whether we take the slow but sure route round the mountain, or the quicker but steep climb, our path needs the certainty of the rock that it spirals round. We need the surety of that, the central pole of the caduceus. If you look at a sweet pea plant or bindweed, you will see that if a tendril cannot find a support, it will still spiral, but chaotically. We are told that these two paths exist towards the end of our journey. Should we dwell too much on which we might take, or even which we might be on right now? Whether we want to be part of the elite or walking with the masses? I had to chuckle when I read an article by J.V. Joshi, there again I don't know who he was either, printed in the Theosophical in 1955. This is, well, you'll see. It is called Life Piled on Life Were All Too Little. That title's taken from a poem, Ulysses, by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And these highlights might serve as a little sting in the tail. I like to give a sting in the tail occasionally. There is a tendency, he said, amongst Theosophists and other seekers to deprecate and undervalue this life on earth. In some of our literature, the exaltation of the non-physical world over the physical has had the effect of making Theosophists desire to attain consciousness on the superphysical planes long before they have attained full consciousness on the physical plane. The desire to be an invisible helper, when it is doubtful whether one is even a tolerable, visible helper. It's fun. It's good, isn't it? is a manifestation of the same doubtful sense of value which places life and work on other planes as by itself superior or more spiritual than that on the physical plane. Is this desire to escape this life a form of escapism, which merely postpones and covers up the problem of life and does not solve it? He says, the earnest seeker after truth and happiness realizes that this life on earth at present is full of unhappiness because of the cruelty and want of kindness of man to man. He realizes in practice and in reality the principle of brotherhood, which is the supreme principle and basis of all the great teachings in the world. He may wish to be born again and again until he has achieved his ideal of fanning the divine fire in every human heart so that it burns away all the dross and impurity of cruelty, ignorance and ugliness. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Joshi, but I think things have got worse, not better. Although I do think there are a lot more people in the world doing good things. So maybe that helps balance it a bit. Anyway, that's the end of the quote. To be born again and again would be to travel the spiral path. To speed things up would be to scale the rock face. Whichever way we take must be a path of service. The task of self-perfecting is never undertaken by the aspirant for self-gain, but solely for the attainment of greater effectiveness in the service of others in all kingdoms, not just the human. HPB writes in The Voice of the Silence that to live to benefit mankind is the first step. Goodness me! That doesn't give me much excuse for leaving service till later. Oh well, at least I'm a Theosophist. And the Master KH said, none of you can be so blind as to suppose that this is your first dealing with Theosophy. But what is it that HPB wrote in her little book? I don't know if you've all come across it. Practical Occultism, where she talks about occultism as opposed to Theosophy. So in comparing Theosophy and occult science, she states that it is easy to become a Theosophist. Any person of average intellectual capacities and a leaning towards the metaphysical, of pure, unselfish life, who finds more joy in helping his neighbour than in receiving help himself, one who is ever ready to sacrifice his own pleasures for the sake of other people, and who loves truth, goodness and wisdom for their own sake, not for the benefit they may confer, is a Theosophist. Gulp. Oh! That description makes me feel ashamed that Master KH had to say, remember you are Theosophists. It makes me realise that to be a true Theosophist is to live a life of service or sacred labour, whichever path I take. The knowledge and the wisdom we seek are both within and without. We can receive assistance in this search by books or the words of a teacher, but sooner or later we must read the message of truth directly from the source. Each goes forth by their own efforts, whether with stout shoes, a knapsack and a walking stick, or with rope, hammer and crampons. Thank you.